Hello and welcome to episode 12 of Diary of a Folk Witch. Diaries are somewhere where we can record our deepest feelings and secrets, but some secrets are worth sharing. So join me in my walk through living folk witchcraft through the use of diary entries, informative discussions and occasionally the odd monograph or two. Welcome to my world. Date, October 27th, 2024. Moon phase, waning crescent. Weather, mizzling rain and misty. Location, Liverpool, Merseyside. Wow, I have a lot to catch up on with you lovely people. I'm trying to get into the habit and a rhythm of posting out podcasts at least once a week for you, and I'm sure one day soon that will happen. But in the meantime, I would like to offer you this diary entry from last month, just before Samhain. I hope you enjoy it. It's getting dark now. It's only nearly 5 p.m. and already the sky is almost black. As I sit in the back passenger seat of our family car with my husband driving and my best friend up front in passenger seat, I drowsily watch the city of Liverpool and its many lights and noises disappear in favour of the Lancashire borderlands and the country lanes that take us home. Of course, Liverpool was once part of Lancashire too. It was only in the 1970s that this once great county was carved into pieces in order to form separate metropolitan areas of Manchester, Greater Manchester and Merseyside, and what wasn't placed within these metropolitan areas was sometimes tagged onto Cheshire. The emasculation of Lancashire, as I once read it described as by one local folklorist. But it is what it is, and where boundary lines change, so too does the land energy after some years. I feel it. I always have done. I remember as a child how I amazed my nan's partner on our long car journeys down to the West Country, because even before I could read, I would say things like, "Corfe Castle is coming up in about 5 minutes," or "We've changed counties now." And this was before I could memorise journeys too. I can't explain how I've always had this proclivity to know this sort of thing. It's an energetic compass I seem to have. Even now, I can tell my husband almost exactly, give or take a few feet, when we've crossed a county line, or when an old coffin road is nearby, or if we're not far from some old site or barrow. A form of psychic GPS, perhaps. The only time that this skill falters is if I'm unwell or having a relapse with my ME, which is understandable. Fatigue and pain can dull all of our physical and energetic senses. It fascinates others when I demonstrate this odd knowing, but to me it's more of a useful skill. I've never been fully lost in my whole life. I've always been able to navigate my way home somehow, even when against the odds, such as from really disorientating journeys or experience out in the woods or even upon the moors. My mum used to joke that I must have been a gypsy in a previous life, because no matter where we were, I could always find my way. This psychic-like GPS is pinging now. From my dreary state, I begin to stir and ask my husband whereabouts we are, because it feels like we've crossed a county line. He smirks and explains we're just leaving St Helens and crossing now into the Lancashire and Greater Manchester region, not far from the East Lancs Road. I sigh in relief and sit back in my seat again. I'm eager to get home and see the kids, but I'm also so tired, physically and energetically. I'm also aching and sore. I've spent much of this weekend showing my best friend around my favourite English city, Liverpool. And with my limited mobility, it hasn't been easy, but it has been fun. Today we'd been to Speak Hall, and yesterday we toured the city. Together my friend and I had spent that first day, yesterday, out visiting the Beatles Story Museum, as my best friend is a fan of the famous Liverpool rock band. I then gave her a tour of the docks and the beautiful Mersey, and looked upon the architectural magnificence of both the Cunard and Liver buildings. Those are the liver birds, I explained, pointing up to the mythical bronze birds perched atop the famous building. There is a whole load of folklore and urban myth around them. They're supposed to be mythical birds that guard the city. The bird that faces the docks and the River Mersey is said to be female and looks out to sea to watch out for potential danger and to ensure that all sailors and cargo come back to dock safely. And the bird overlooking the city is supposed to be male and is said to watch over the city and all of the families and wives back home. But others joke that he's really looking out to make sure which pubs are still open for the dockers coming home. Although the Liver building was beautiful and lit up in gorgeous green lights for the city's Festival of Light, my friend and I were eager to get back to mine. The Albert docks were heaving with people for the festival, and at one point there was nearly a crush as the crowd surged to get over the small bridge over one of the dock's waterways, and neither of us do particularly well in crowds. This surge of busyness was a vast difference to the peace and quiet we'd experienced earlier that day at St James's Gardens, or more commonly known as St James's Cemetery. We had chosen to visit this now decommissioned cemetery that is now a city gardenscape and therefore open to the public, because like me, my friend has an interest in ghosts, folklore and witchcraft, and there are few cemeteries that are said to be more haunted than St James's Gardens in Liverpool. Some would argue that it is England's most haunted cemetery. Speaking as someone who can often see, sense and commune with spirit, I would politely make the case that although St James's Gardens is certainly a very active place of rest, it seems no more or less active than many other cemeteries. And from purely my own personal experience, both Highgate Cemetery in North London and St Mary's Churchyard in Newchurch in Pendle are far more active when it comes to general ghosts and other forms of entities. But, of course, there are very many variables when it comes to ghosts. Significant dates, holidays such as Christmas or Halloween, and Saints' Days such as All Souls' Days can make some places more or even less active. Even variables such as whether it's daytime, nighttime, dusk or dawn, or if there's local building work and demolitions going on, can increase or decrease what many deem to be paranormal activity. But for me, and at my time of visiting St James's, it seemed no more or less active than many other cemeteries. Today we opted to not go on the evening ghost tour of St James's Gardens. It costs money, is theatrical, and in my personal opinion, not really respectful to the dead. I have a similar kind of killjoy attitude to so-called ghost hunts as well. The dead are not entertainment for the living. Small groups investigating for scientific or spiritual purposes are not too bad, if done so respectfully, but tramping around a cemetery in dress-up and entertaining tourists seems somewhat disrespectful to me, as does videoed ghost hunts with screeching presenters who squawk at the slightest creaking floorboard. Instead, I promised to tell my friend of any energies that I felt or saw, and we could take photographs and try and perhaps maybe see if the EVP app on my phone worked, but quietly and discreetly so, and only after asking permission from the spirits of the place first. I have mixed thoughts on EVP. I've yet to find a professional tool or app that offers accurate spirit voices. It's seemingly nearly all random or gibberish. And so it was today. Lots of random words that made no sense or seemingly held no context to the area we were in. The only thing of note that was the EVP monitor seemed to be more active in the cemetery compared to when I'd tried it out at home or in local fields, etc. So perhaps there is something to it. I'm just yet to be convinced that it's actually accurately picking up on spirit voices. Although I have found that EVP is not the most reliable tool for me, it was still interesting to discreetly experiment with. Prior to use, I whispered to the spirits of the place what I was doing and why, and if at any point they wanted me to stop, then I would. We had reached St James's by taxi from the train station, and we were driven by a very typical happy and chatty Scouser who clearly enjoyed talking to customers. He asked us why we were headed to St James's, and instead of saying we were interested in ghost stories and folklore or that I was a witch, I simply said, "Oh, I'm dead boring, me. I like architecture and stonework." "That's not boring," the cabbie chimed in, and then, I suspect as a form of test, he said, "Go on then, hen, what's your favourite building in Liverpool?" And without hesitation, I replied that it was the Cunard building. This seemed to get our cabbie's attention. I think he thought me a tourist, especially as my accent is a bit of a muddle these days. Not quite London anymore, and not fully Lancashire either. I don't think he realised that I was a semi-local who not only visits the city often for appointments and shopping, but that most of my children were in fact born in Liverpool. I suspect that he thought I would say something obvious and offer up some touristy answer like the Liver building or the World Museum. The cabbie was very intrigued and then asked me, "Why the Cunard building?" Obviously I couldn't tell him about the fascinating ghost I had seen there in 2022, so instead I spoke solely about the gorgeous and luxurious interior, the panelling, woodwork and sculptured ceilings that I had seen when I went to register my son's birth. The cab driver nodded and said, "If you think that's beautiful, you need to have a look at the India building. Take your pal there and your jaw will drop. My missus said she's never seen anything like it." I politely promised to have a look sometime, relieved that so far he had not realised I was in fact journeying to St James's to walk amongst the spirits, collect water from the magic spring, as well as admire the Gothic stone masonry of the Edwardian architecture of the cathedral. I have no problem with openly talking about witchcraft. I wouldn't run a blog and a podcast if I did. I just don't like to... How is it my best friend phrases it? Yes, worry the normies. Once we arrived, my friend Angela and I paid the driver and headed off down the steep and sloping path that winds down to the cemetery, now gardens. All along the sloping paths are old Victorian gravestones lining the wall, like a macabre procession mournfully guiding you down the path. All apparently reclaimed stone from the main cemetery, from where it was decommissioned and then re-landscaped in the 1900s. Halfway down the sloping path you come to a tunnel that was formed by carving into the quarry rock. It's shadowed and somewhat foreboding to some, but enticing to me. There are places the daylight cannot quite touch, and the shadows dance around you. Or are they only shadows? Twice I caught myself doing a double take at something that looked like a shadow, but was gone in an instant. Before we enter the tunnel, I look up to my right and point out the cathedral to my friend Angela. It looms above us like an overbearing god that it stands in worship for. You see, St James's Cemetery is built in what used to be a stone quarry used in the 1700s. Once the quarry was exhausted, it was decided that the space would be suitable and necessary as a burial ground, thus easing some of the growing city's problem of running out of places to bury the dead. The cathedral stands at the top of the quarry, on what many call St James's Mount, but sometimes historically was also known as Mount Zion. We reach the end of the coffin tunnel, and the cemetery opens up before us, like the end of a macabre birth canal, and before us is the realm of the dead, instead of the realm of the living, which is of course the gift of exiting the actual birth canal. Even though we're now in open space, it felt somewhat claustrophobic. Being so far below ground level and with rising stone quarry walls all around us, it felt as though we had descended into the underworld itself. And that was certainly the vibe around that end of the cemetery, like hell. Unlike other graveyards that feel peaceful, this section of the cemetery felt closed in and overcrowded, energetically speaking, that is. I know that there are mass burial graves on this location, and by the energy in this quarter of the site, I know that we are close to at least one of them. There are tragic accounts of how those who could not afford a decent burial were simply shrouded up, if they were lucky, and placed into mass graves, sometimes with only an inch of soil scattered on top of their remains, ready for the next day's burials. Too much of a layer of soil would mean filling up the pit too quickly and would waste precious space. Those poor people and their families. A pang of sympathy aches in my stomach. Both my friend Angela and I felt watched by unseen eyes in this section of the graveyard, and although I saw no fully formed apparitions, the shadows of spirits darted around like moths. But we were safe. I wore my obsidian and amber protection charm on a silver chain for energetic protection, and had extended protection over my friend too. So, quietly, and with respect for the spirits of that place, we walked around quietly. Some of the examples of Gothic gravestones were simply beautiful. To think that these were all once carved by hand by skilled stonemasons. The talent and time taken to craft such memorials is mind-blowing. All around us, the steep quarry walls tower above us, so naturally I went to get better acquainted. Who wouldn't? Hundreds of years' worth of graffiti had been etched into the walls, everything from names and symbols to more modern and urban tags used by gangs and youths, and then the occasional witch mark. Interesting, I thought to myself. Perhaps some were worried about witches practising in the grounds by night or stealing body parts for foul workings and necromancy. Witch marks are believed to be an apotropaic marking system used within folkways, not by witches themselves, but often by Christians, especially Catholics, to ward off witchcraft. Lancashire has always been a Catholic stronghold, Liverpool more so, and still is due to its high Irish population. So it doesn't surprise me at all to find examples of what seem to be old witch marks. We followed the quarry wall until we came to a bricked-up tunnel that was further barred by being gated. I explained to my friend that there were other tunnels associated with this cemetery, but had been bricked up due to safety concerns. Another shadow person now. This time seemingly stepping closer because I pointed out an interesting symbol etched into the wall. "No!" I said aloud and firmly to the shadow. And with that, it dissipated. Many people seem to fear ghosts, but very often they're only interested in seeing what you're up to, perhaps trying to pass on a message, or seeking to draw energy from you in order to fully manifest as a full apparition. In most instances, a confident word, rebuke, prayer, or exerting purposeful boundaries makes the spirit back off. That's why I get so annoyed at TV ghost shows when you see the presenters go into hysterics. It's ignorant and in most cases absolutely unnecessary. If anything, all it does is feed more troublesome and prankish spirits, the energy that you're so freely giving away through fear and hysteria. Together, my friend and I moved through the cemetery. The grounds opened up a bit more now, and the energy became lighter. But to my left I could sense another grave pit. I mentally said a prayer for the souls of all who were buried there. Angela commented too, something along the lines of, "Oh, this is better. I don't feel like I'm walking on graves now." I couldn't help but laugh. "Sorry, I didn't mean to laugh," I replied. "It's just, well, there's over 57,000 people buried in this not very big cemetery. Everywhere you step there will be single graves or mass graves for those who could not afford the luxury of a single grave. This graveyard only closed in 1933 because it was full. The only reason it looks like open space in parts now is because the gravestones were moved to landscape for the gardens." My friend shudders. "Don't worry. Just be mindful of the graves you can see. Don't make tactless jokes, avoid touching the gravestones with bare hands, and we'll be just fine." "Have you seen anything other than shadows yet?" Angela asks. "Well, yes actually. There's a man over there by the Celtic cross grave. But don't worry, he seems fine. I'm not even sure he's aware that we're here. He seems to be some kind of old groundskeeper." Angela laughs, not in an unkind way, more in surprise at my blasé tone, and we walked on. I'm blessed in that my friend is so open-minded, and although she doesn't really identify as being a witch, she loves talking to me about my life of witchcraft and spirit work. Eventually we came to St James's Spring, a spring from a still yet unknown source. It was discovered in 1733 by quarrymen working in what was then the quarry. The cemetery itself was not created until 1829. Doctors and quacks alike were quick to jump upon and capitalise upon the spring's supposed healing qualities. Indeed, it's still used today as a health tonic, despite Liverpool City Council advising people not to drink from it due to possible sewage contamination. But it's not just sewage contamination I'm wary of. It's corpse contamination too. You see, in 1894, due to Liverpool being an ever-expanding and re-landscaping city, the graves from the nearby St Peter's churchyard had to be dug up to be moved in order to widen a local road. In the process of disturbing the deceased in the name of progress, it was discovered that the corpse of Captain David Gwynn had been completely petrified. He was supposedly as hard as stone, and it was hypothesised that the minerals in the spring could have caused this, as it was thought to run through the ground in that area and then exit at the spring head in St James's Gardens. So, no, I didn't fancy drinking likely sewage and possibly corpse-contaminated water, even if the corpses were very old and likely to just be bones by now. But that doesn't stop others. Indeed, when we reach the spring, there is a man filling up no less than 6 large demijohns of water. I'm tempted to ask him why he's collecting so much, but he looks nervous, so I leave him to his task. When it's our turn to reach the spring head, we have to be careful. It's not very well maintained, and the ground is extremely slippery from water, mud, and some form of soaking wet moss or algae. I take my flask from my backpack and fill it up. "I thought you weren't going to drink from it," Angela asks. "I'm not," I smiled. "Water isn't just for drinking when you're a witch." This water is very powerful. It's often used in banishing workings or for divination. When I want spring water to drink, I go to St Winifred's in North Wales. After collecting water from the spring, we take a leisurely stroll around the last length of the cemetery. We reach one grave, and I stop in my tracks. My friend sees my reaction and asks what's wrong. "Is it a ghost or something?" "No," I muse slowly, still untangling the energy both beneath my feet and all around me. It's not a ghost, but something happened here though. What I'm picking up on is that someone was attacked here, or there was a big fight, or something happened and someone got hurt. I think we should walk away now. We leave the cemetery at this point, but ponder on what I've just experienced. I suppose it is entirely possible some form of attack happened on the grounds over the years. It's been open gardens for decades, and has everything from ghost tours, drug users, rowdy uni students pranking each other on drunk nights out, to homeless people sleeping rough amongst the trees. In fact, we saw one pop-up tent at around the halfway mark of our walk around the cemetery, half hidden in the shade of the trees, a sad testament to Liverpool's rising issue around rough sleeping and homelessness, and our government doing little to ease the problem. My walking is stiff now, and what with not having my wheelchair, we opted to get another cab down to the Albert Docks. The next driver wasn't as chatty as the first, but he was pleasant enough. We get out of the taxi right in front of the Beatles story and begin stage 2 of our first day out. I must admit to what must be almost a cardinal sin in Liverpool. I'm not a huge Beatles fan. As a music lover, I can appreciate the huge influence that they had on music for decades to come. But what can I say? When it comes to music of my dad's era, I'm more of a David Bowie, T-Rex, Fleetwood Mac kind of gal. But it's an interesting museum. No ghosts that I could see or sense, but I did pick up on some interesting energy through the technique of psychometry on some items that either belonged to members of the band or to those associated with them. Out of respect, I will not discuss in detail what I picked up on energetically from certain items at the museum, but I did glean some fascinating information which I've documented for myself privately. When we finally left the Beatles Museum, I was relieved. It was fascinating, it was interesting, but it was also claustrophobic and hot and busy, and we had to wear these clunky headphones that reminded me of the tin cans I had to wear when I studied performing arts and music tech at college. We had to wear these the whole way around the museum. It was all a bit overwhelming, really, for a neurospicy like me who struggles with lots of bright lights and sound sensitivity. The next part of our day is much more fun. Food. My friend wanted to find some scouse, a regional dish that's basically like a hot pot, but it's so lush. We can't find any though along the dock, so opt for a chippy tea instead. Feeling rather full and lethargic, we decide to have a quick look at the crystal shop. My friend loves crystals. I quite like them too, but it's so hard to find ethically sourced ones, or even genuine crystals that are not lab-made. After then fighting our way through the hordes of people who were attending the Festival of Light and pointing out the liver birds atop of the building, this concluded our first day. Today was a bit slower paced, but I'm still so tired and aching from yesterday. There's no way I'd be able to handle public transport to get me to Speak Hall. So my lovely husband kindly drove us to Speak Hall on the outskirts of Liverpool, while our children spent the day at home with their nan. I've been to Speak Hall Gardens before, but this was my first time touring the house. The last time I'd tried to visit, the hall had been closed for maintenance. My friend and I walked along the gravelled path and past a rather Victorian-looking kitchen garden, complete with greenhouse. Next, an old cottage that looks as though it may have once been the groundkeeper's quarters or some other form of staff home, and then we turn right and meander up a short woodland-like path. Eventually it opens up into a huge green lawn to the right of us and a perfectly maintained row of yew trees that form something more akin to a hedge than a line of trees on our left. And there it is, Speak Hall, in all of its Tudor magnificence, surrounded by yew. It's everywhere, like a guard patrolling the perimeter. To me, it's interesting that yew features so prominently around the outside of the house, because inside the hall is a courtyard, and in that courtyard are two huge and magnificent examples of yew trees that apparently may predate the current house, which was built in around 1530. According to one staff member that I spoke to today, the trees in the courtyard had been examined and were first estimated to be over 500 years old, but another more recent analysis speculated that the trees may even be as old as 700, which, if accurate, would date the trees to around the 1300s. The house was built some 200 years later. It's generally agreed that the house was likely built around these trees, and is somewhat of a mystery as to why. The two trees in the courtyard, known locally as Adam and Eve, sit in the centre of a square, and the house surrounds them. All sorts of local folklore and theories exist regarding these two yew trees, from them being part of some ancient druid site or grove, to being fairy trees, or even to it being merely coincidental that the trees are there, pointing out that when Speak Hall was being built, it was done so in parts, with the Great Hall supposedly being built first, and other parts of the building being added over time. Therefore, it could be purely coincidental that the house was built around these trees. However, looking at the design of the house, I find this unlikely. I find it more plausible that the house was built around the trees, or both Adam and Eve were planted around the time of construction, but without conclusive dating of the trees, we may never know for sure. One local witch that I know believes that one of the reasons Speak Hall is so haunted is because of both the Adam and Eve yew trees in the courtyard and the other yews surrounding the hall. She believes the yews trap spirits who die in the house or grounds within the home and immediate perimeter, thus preventing them from leaving or passing on. It's an interesting theory, especially as the yew tree is a tree steeped in lore around death, funerals and ghosts. I suppose it could possibly make it more tricky for some spirits to pass over, or perhaps may even amplify hauntings. But I have found that if a spirit truly wants to pass fully into the realm of spirit, they will often do so, either by themselves or with help. So I'm not entirely sure that they use trap spirits in the house. But like I said, perhaps it's possible that they're amplifying the spirits that are there. Another testament to the yew tree's association with death, spirits and funerals is due to the highly toxic nature. The seed within the tree's fleshy red berry is highly toxic and can kill, as can the leaves. Yew trees, or complete lines and encirclings of yew, can be found in over 500 cemeteries throughout England, many of which predate the building of the church on the site, which could indicate sites of yew groves may have been specifically sought out when building certain churches and graveyards. This may indicate that during Christian colonisation, Christian officials perhaps wanted to build over pre-Christian sacred sites or yew groves in order to stamp out pre-Christian beliefs, or even possibly to utilise the power already held in that place. After all, Catholicism, which was the original Christian faith of Britain prior to Henry VIII's Reformation and other later to and fro tussles between Catholic doctrine and the now established Church of England, was very superstitious. And speaking as someone who used to be a practising Catholic, it's both a faith and a culture that's very steeped in folklore and blended with folkways by many of its followers. So it is possible that some churches were built intentionally near yew trees in order to further protect the church building from evil wandering spirits or keep the dead good and buried within the grounds of the earth. Of course, though, as tree folklore progressed over the years, some yews were later intentionally planted in and around graveyards. This especially seems to have been the case during the Victorian era, when combined interests in death, occultism and floriography were high, and sprawling necropolises were built around cities like London to house the dead. What these lines or circles of yews stood for prior to Christianity will never likely be fully understood or known, their origins and meanings perhaps lost to history. We may have speculative guesses, because of more modern and often inaccurate interpretations of, for example, the Irish Ogham, which is not a tree alphabet, despite what many will try to tell you. But that's all they often are, speculative guesses. Instead, it's often more reliable to look at our more recent established folklore and folkways when it comes to tree and plant lore. One immediate example of yew trees and cemeteries that comes to mind is of course St Mary's Church and New Church in Pendle. But this is no surprise given the local area's history of witchcraft, grave disturbances, ghosts and necromancy. Some believe that yew trees there stop the ghosts of the dead leaving the graveyard. There they must stay until God or the devil calls them home. Others will say that yew prevents witches from performing successful workings on the hallowed ground. Suddenly I'm instantly jerked back into the present moment, having been mindfully lost in the deep reflection of yew tree folklore, as my best friend suddenly gasps as she sees Speke Hall for the first time. It turns out that she hadn't realised it was a Tudor building, and I hadn't thought to tell her. I think, given all of the other buildings that we saw in the city yesterday, Angela had probably thought that Speke Hall would be more Georgian or Victorian in its appearance. But no, this architectural masterpiece was built in 1530 under William Norris, and it apparently remained a family home until the early 20th century, when it was then passed on to the National Trust. There are many secrets in this house, and they whisper loudly to anyone who will listen. Once past the ever-watchful yew trees and their jewel-like berry-red eyes, we traverse the bridge and reach the main door. It's been recently repainted by the look of it, because a huge original wooden doors are gleaming in black paint. A volunteer welcomes us into the building, and Angela and I step back into history. The entranceway, the corridors, everything is just stunning. I'm in awe of how traditional the house is. I grew up in the south of England on the Surrey-Kent border, up on the North Downs overlooking London, therefore not far from Hever Castle, another Tudor masterpiece, but unlike here at Speke Hall, parts of Hever Castle were refurbished in the early 1900s by John Jacob Astor. So when you enter Hever Castle, you're met with Tudor interior and exterior architecture and style, and then suddenly step into one part of the house that's very Art Nouveau and full of lush Edwardian grandeur. It's pretty, but not really in keeping with the rest of the castle, and once home of Queen Anne Boleyn. However, only one part of the castle was modernised, as sadly John Jacob Astor perished on the Titanic in April 1912. This American tycoon never did get to finish modernising his English retreat. But here, Speke Hall, other than some vague nods to Victorian fireplaces, servant bell pull systems and parlour tables, it's still very true to its Tudor origins. It's dark inside. There is, of course, electric lighting, but the depth of the dark wooden beams absorbs much of the light, and it makes everything subdued, like dusk, even in the daylight. Together, Angela and I enter the downstairs room at the front of the house. I become aware of a female spirit stood by the fireplace. No sooner do I look in her direction does she seem to vanish, but she comes back again a few minutes later when Angela and I are admiring a beautiful old card games table. The spirit in question seems happy that we've noticed this piece and follows us on to the next room, a games room. Perhaps this lady was fond of playing games in life. I don't know for sure, but I suspect this spirit is perhaps Adelaide, the last private owner of the home. As we walk down a long ground floor corridor, we eventually come to the Great Hall, and it's magnificent. Everything from the tiled floor to the phenomenal fireplace with ornate stonework from mantel to ceiling is beautiful. To the right of the fireplace, a single carved face peers out and looks around the hall. There is no matching bearded face to the left of the hearth, though, but higher up there is a face beneath a traditional Lancashire rose. It's impossible to tell from ground level whether the face is meant to be male or female. I wonder if it's meant to represent the moon. It does offer up a lunar-like quality to its features. Then, above this face and the Lancashire rose, is another face. This one appears to be smiling. From them, bridging the gap from left to right, high above the fireplace, are many carved faces, all displaying different expressions, from surprise to seemingly to horror. I wonder what together these 12 faces represent. They don't seem to be calendrical, folkloric or otherwise, but random. So I ask a volunteer. He doesn't know for sure, but apparently it's widely accepted that the stone faces were probably meant to represent either the apostles or various Catholic saints. This would make sense, as the Norris family were Catholics. On either side of the fireplace, there are what seems to be cosy little book nooks. Oh, what wouldn't I give to have a half again, but with the added comfort of a book nook next to it. Imagine how cosy that would be on long winter nights. I peep into the nook on the right, and there is a mannequin there, which is obviously usually meant to be some sort of knight in armour, but this week dons a Halloween mask for those who come to Speke Hall, especially for its haunted reputation. I take a step towards the left nook at the fireside, and suddenly let out an audible and unintentional gasp, much to my embarrassment. For only a moment, the spirit of a small boy, perhaps aged 5 or 6, poked his head out of the nook, pulled a cheeky face at me, and then promptly retreated back into the nook and vanished. It's not often that I glimpse a sudden and full spirit apparition with no sign or build-up, but this cheeky little chappie seemed very chuffed with himself at making me jump. If I were to guess, his clothes would indicate that possibly his life had been in the maybe mid-1600s, possibly late. He didn't seem unhappy, in fact the opposite, completely happy to have played a prank on me. I smile and Angela sees, and I explain what I've just seen. Speke Hall certainly lives up to its reputation. It's definitely haunted and extremely active. I can see now why so many paranormal experts like to investigate and study the hall. So far, though, there is seemingly nothing too malevolent in the building. That was soon to change, though. As we ascended the stairs to the first floor, we exited the stairway onto the landing that felt energetically stifling. All of that somewhat welcoming and jovial spirit-like energy of downstairs was gone, and in its place was an overbearing sense of not being welcome in this part of the building. Not at all. To my immediate right was a red rope that barred a few steps up to a walkway that held a solid wooden door at the end. I cannot quite summarise exactly what it was behind that door, which was blocked by the red rope. But even if I could have crossed that cordon, I would not have done. I would not have gone any nearer. I felt one of my guides, Joan, as she warned me to stay back and carry on the tour, going to the left. Joan is often with me and is very good at offering additional protection or warning me of potential danger. I don't know exactly what was on the other side of that door, but from where I stood, it felt masculine, it felt powerful, and it definitely didn't want people coming anywhere near that door. I would not be at all surprised if there have been documented cases of people having things perhaps thrown at them or being pushed in that room. It felt as though there was some sort of powerful poltergeist down there. And to be honest, I'm quite glad I didn't have to pass through that room. It wasn't just me either that picked up on the energy. Angela said, "Oh, I don't like it here, it doesn't feel right." I nodded and we went to walk away down the landing to the left. Behind us, a European couple, possibly French, judging by their accents, reached the top of the stairs, and I heard the woman say in hushed English, "Holy Jesus, I don't like it here. Let's walk down there." I turned to see her indicate towards where both Angela and I were headed, and the couple followed us towards the bedrooms, the woman glancing nervously behind her, back at the same door I had also not wanted to go near. As a witch, you can often commune with spirit. You learn very early on when it's appropriate to push past certain energies and connect or commune in some ways. And witch energies and spirits, it's just safer to say, "Nope, leaving that one well alone." Some mediums will flare their ego and seek to connect anyway. It rarely ends well. As they say, pride cometh before the fall. Upstairs, the bedrooms were pretty and fairly original to the building and style. But it was something else entirely that caught my attention. "A priest hole!" I suddenly exclaimed, so abruptly that it made somebody nearby jump. I apologised to them and then explained to Angela what a priest hole was and why it was significant to things like the original house owners, the Norris family, who were openly Catholic, even when being openly Catholic was dangerous in the 15 and 1600s, how some of the accused Pendle witches were unlikely to have actually been witches, Alice Nutter for example, but were Catholic, therefore accusing local Lancashire Catholics of being witches after the recent gunpowder plot of 1605, which was 7 years prior to the Pendle witch trials, proved to be a convenient way of ridding a county of just some of its many Catholics and dissenters. The priest hole is small, as would be expected, and is wedged between two bedrooms. A volunteer hears me talking to my friend about what a priest hole is and joins me to offer up some more interesting information. This particular priest hole is apparently at the front of the house, and nearby is a lookout point where a servant would always be posted to watch for visitors coming up the main entrance. From there, the servant could send a signal and the priest could hide. It's a fascinating example, but seemingly not in itself haunted. It's actually quite cosy looking inside. To be honest, if it wasn't behind glass, I would have loved to explore it more. Next we enter a room which, from memory, I think is called the tapestry room, but forgive me if I'm wrong. This room is anything but still. Its energy is restless and almost manic. I've never been to the hall before today, but I of course know the infamous story of how Mary Norris is supposed to have thrown her infant son out of the window into the moat, and then herself, after her husband, nicknamed Worthless Sidney, came home to confess that he had squandered the family fortune and was therefore now penniless. History tells us, though, that this story is not true. In fact, that the young baby, named Topham, actually lived to be in his 60s. But being in this room now, I can see how some sort of fabricated or confused story came about. There is a female presence in this room, although I cannot see her, and I do not know if she is Mary Norris or some other family member, but I can certainly feel her. She's anxious and erratic. It feels as though she's pacing and ranting, though I cannot hear her. I stop still to try and untangle the mess of energy in the room. Is this an actual spirit or an energetic replay of an event that happened years ago? No, it's definitely a spirit, but why can't I hear it? It's difficult, like trying to unpick a chaotic tapestry of energy. I close my eyes and try to focus, but the tourists around me all talk loudly about the infamous ghost story. I didn't do it. I feel something whisper. Energetically, that is. It's distant but clear. For clarification, when I say that I feel something whisper, I mean that I feel the voice of the spirit, not hear it with my physical ears. I turn to face the fireplace, where I felt the voice come from. I'm not sure I'm supposed to, but I touch the fireplace for a better reading. And there, in my mind's eye, I see an old replay of a woman. Her hair is dark and loose, half elf-locked from not being brushed, probably not in days. She's locked in this room with an empty cradle. Voices on the other side of the locked door are telling the woman that the door cannot be opened until she's calmed down. I've witnessed this sort of behaviour before, both professionally and personally, from when some poor women experience what's known as postpartum psychosis after giving birth, or are having a poorly episode from bipolar disorder. And this is similar to how this woman appears, although I cannot be sure. It's as though she is in some form of mental health crisis, though, and sadly is not getting the help she needs. Instead, she's locked in the room. However, I feel no presence of a dead baby. Was this how the rumour started? At some point in history, was a mother separated from her child for fear of what she might do? We'll probably never know. Because if this is an instance, a historic instance of postpartum psychosis or some other form of mental health crisis, it would not have been understood at the time of this woman, who is perhaps from the maybe late 1600s, judging by her clothing and the things in the room that I can see with my mind's eye. In fact, pretty much all mental health conditions were not understood then. Coming as I do from South East London and having an immediate family member work for the new Bethlehem Hospital, I happen to know quite a lot about the Bethlehem history. And although the Bethlehem Hospital was originally in London and not Liverpool, its history is directly related to mental health throughout the whole of England. The original Bethlehem Hospital in London was a place so horrid, squalid and chaotic that it's where we get our word Bedlam from. This immediate family member of mine who works at the modern Bethlehem Hospital in South East London tells me it's still far from perfect, but better than it was when it was in its original central London form, where people could actually pay and go and view sick and vulnerable people who were deemed mad. You would be surprised how recently our mental health services in Britain have improved. It was only around 150 years or so ago when many hospitals divided their patients into just two categories, and they were the melancholic and the ravers. And that was it. There wasn't even male and female wards to start with. Many patients were half-starved, half-naked and open to abuse. It stands to reason then why, for families of means, they would often prefer to closet away family members who are in crisis, rather than send them to an institution which might cause public embarrassment. Obviously, this is only my psychic reading of the haunted room. I could be way off. Other psychics or mediums may have other thoughts, but I offer my experience up in good faith and honesty to what I saw and felt energetically. I can't say with any certainty that any of what I have said has happened here happened. All I can do is try and make sense of the historical replay that I saw while touching the fireplace. I reach the infamous cradle and stop dead. I feel sick. There's no ghost there. There's no infant spirit energy at all, but a nauseating wave of grief comes over me. Similar to how I felt once when a loved one passed away so suddenly and unexpectedly that the shock made me feel nauseous. Whatever happened in this room, the spirit here is certainly fixated on this cradle. A volunteer steps towards me. Perhaps I've gone pale, I don't know, but she asks me if I'm okay. I didn't hear her at first. I was lost in the horrible moment of all that grief and frustration that the cradle held. I looked up and apologised, saying that I was okay, but the volunteer doesn't look convinced. She asks me if I feel unwell, because apparently many visitors become unwell when stood by that cradle. Yes, I can imagine, I replied. The volunteer now looks at me quizzically and half puzzled. So I change the subject by thanking her and then turning to leave the room. On leaving the room, I take a moment to ground and adjust my psychic protection. I dial my shield up a bit in order to view the rest of the house in more peace. From here on, I can still sense spirits, but they are less clear and bothersome and therefore less intrusive. It's like a screen is between they and I can enjoy the rest of the house and just take in the history. The kitchen downstairs is gorgeous. It's my idea of heaven. Copper pans adorn the walls, stoves, butter churns, huge tables, hanging herbs. I could spend all day happily cooking, making food, preserves, or preparing herbal medicine in this space. Along the long wooden table in the centre of the room are laminated spells, which are set out to amuse the visitors for Halloween. Some of them are utter nonsense, of course, but a few of them seem to be based on genuine traditional witchcraft, including one charm square that's almost identical to one posted in the Pendle Heritage Centre. From memory, I believe it was a protective charm that was found to have been hidden in the beams of a local Lancashire barn. There's a member of staff in the room, so I ask her what book these spells are photocopied from. And at first she dismisses me. Oh, they aren't real, dear, they're just for the tourists. I take the time to patiently explain that although some of them are obviously not very effective workings, some do seem to be based on actual older magic. She asks how I know, so I explain my background. Her face lights up. Do you know what apotropaic magic is? She asks. I do, I reply. In fact, I know a lot about it, especially witch marks in Catholic homes and in general throughout the northwest of England. Now the lady is very excited. Oh, please come with me. You have to see the front door. There are witch marks everywhere. I'm surprised by this, because I can usually spot these old folk markings a mile off, including one I once found in Chester Cathedral. And I hadn't spotted any when I'd initially walked into the hall. But sure enough, there on the door were scores of scratchings and engravings. Some meant nothing, others were clearly witch marks. I'd missed them due to the brand new paintwork of all things. Its sheen had masked any of the markings, but after about 20 minutes of careful scouting about and shielding the flare of the setting sun, I found 5 potential witch marks. Unsurprising, really, given the period of the home and its family history. Many Catholics used what often looked like 2 interlocking W's, but were actually thought to be M's, representing the Virgin Mary, and these were used to ward off witches and foul workings. Myself and two members of staff get chatting, and I guessed I must have been taking a good while because before I know it, Mark is calling my phone to let me know that the site is closing soon and I should probably head back to the car with Angela. He's been sat in the cafe having a coffee. Oops, I've taken too long being absorbed in regional folkways that I've lost track of time. But before I leave, a staff member asked to take my contact details. Apparently, the National Trust at Speak want to learn more about regional folklore and witchcraft for future events, and they might want to speak to me more at some point. To be honest, I doubt that I will be contacted, but I politely oblige and I hand over my email. Angela jokes, "I can't take you anywhere, can I?" And we both laugh. I'm a bit sad to be leaving, but also I think it's probably best. By allowing myself to fully energetically read parts of the house, it's left me feeling very tired. I need to recharge now. I spend so much time at home with the children due to them being so young, and it's a home that's relatively inactive when it comes to ghosts because my husband and I put up a lot of energetic protection. Other than performing everyday witchery, I have become unaccustomed to extremely active places. However, it was nice to flex my wings a bit and practice my skill. My mother used to say that to commune with spirit, or to have the kenning, was a gift and a blessing. I've never really agreed with that, for lots of reasons. In fact, for much of my life, it's been burdensome and not always welcome. But I would say it is a skill. And I realised in my late teens this skill can either be practised and disciplined in order to be useful, or remain burdensome and unpredictable due to denying it or pushing it away. I chose to practice and be disciplined. This has meant that I can have a quiet home life where protection is set so that friendly ancestors and allies in spirit can come in, but nothing else. Then, when I am out, I can tune in or out of what is there energetically at will. It wasn't easy to do. In fact, it took years of practice and engaging with various teachers. And at the age of 38, as I am now, I'm still learning and refining this skill. But today at Speak and yesterday at St James's Cemetery, it was certainly a good opportunity to practice again in a manageable bite-sized way. But now we're on our way home. I'm in the back seat of the car and I'm half asleep, but my eyes ping open. Before my eyes can fully focus, I know we're driving through Bryn Gates. Even from my dreary state, I feel that old Coffin Lane coming up, and running alongside it, Coffin Lane Brook. There is that psychic GPS again. I smile and think of my mother again. Despite our often tempestuous relationship, she would be happy to know I eventually settled into this energetic gift, or, as I prefer to call it, skill. It's something that she would sometimes call the kenning. Something that she also had, but always found it hard to practice due to her health difficulties. Another 30 minutes later and we are finally home. The porch light is on and it illuminates the many charms, wind chimes and Roma horseshoes that adorn the porch. All protective charms of our own. No witch marks here, for obvious reasons. It would be silly to use anti-witch marks on a witch's home, but our own apotropaic working shimmer and twirl in the October breeze. Home is inviting. Behind that front door are 5 lovely but rowdy children, a wonderful mother-in-law, my spinning wheel, warm kitchen, herbal apothecary, working space, my bed, creature comforts, and my quiet retreat from the world. They say a home is an Englishman's castle. To me, a home is a witch's retreat, a place of safety, rest, love and creativity. And after these 2 very busy days, I'm looking forward to going back to my quiet domestic folk witch life. It's nice to go out, but it's also nice to sit in peace and stillness too, to get my writing done. which there is actually a lot of to do. I've got so much to catch up on. And November is nearly here. A month of summer's end, quiet, and a time of embracing the darkness and the rest that winter brings from the comfort of home, and it's a wonderful thing to do. From the time, mists, and distance between us, blessings from me to you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me for this week's episode. If you would like to explore some more of my work, you can find me at diaryofafolkwitch.com. Otherwise, you can read my work in Pagan Dawn magazine, which you can subscribe to through the Pagan Federation. You can also find me over on social media such as Instagram and Facebook, listed as Diary of a Folk Witch. Thank you so much for your continued support. I am planning on setting up a Patreon, but it is taking time. Thank you so much. Bye.